morning. But they didn't want to rub it in. Yeah, I guess that's true. So congratulations to those of you that are Ohio State fans. Obviously, that was a big deal for you guys this week, right? That's amazing. Doesn't happen all the time. It's something to celebrate when it does. So congratulations. Next year maybe it'll be something different. Who knows? Maybe it'll be the same thing. I don't know. Congratulations. That was awesome. But this morning, we're continuing in our series in Daniel, and we're going to be finishing up Daniel this morning and our time in that book of Daniel. And so this morning, I just wanted to find out from you guys a little bit this morning. Like, let me ask you this. How many of you guys have been praying about something, believing that God will do it, and it just hasn't happened yet? Anybody in that same situation right now, like in that type of situation where they're like, I've been praying about something, I've been believing that God's going to do it, I've been really seeking after God for something, and it just hasn't happened yet? Like, I think there's a lot of people in our world right now, even especially, I think, that are in that type of situation, that find themselves there. Obviously, I was hoping and praying for Penn State to be national champs, but that didn't happen. But seriously though, I think there are things in our lives. I think a lot of people have things in their lives that they're praying about, they're thinking about, they're seeking God after, and it just hasn't happened yet. And we all know that God can, right? And we believe that He will, but He just hasn't done it yet, right? There's those things in our lives sometimes that I think that are that way, where it's like we're really pouring our heart out for something, and we're praying for it, and we're hoping for it, and it just hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened the way we think it should, or we've got no answers yet, and we're still just trying to figure those things out. And we're going to be looking at that a little bit this morning. And this morning, if you find yourself in that type of situation, my prayer is that the passage that we're going to be looking at and what we're going to be looking at in Daniel this morning would be an encouragement to you, if you're in that type of situation. So Daniel chapter 10 is where we're going to be this morning, right? We're looking at some of the later chapters in Daniel here in Daniel chapter 10. And at this point, Daniel is an old man, okay? He's an old man. He's probably around 84 to 90 years old at this point. Like, he's later in his years. He's not the same young Daniel that we talked about at the very beginning and things. So he's a little older. And in Daniel chapter 10, starting at verse 1, it says this: "In the 3rd year of the reign of King Cyrus of Persia, Daniel, also known as Belteshazzar, had another vision. He understood that the vision concerned events certain to happen in the future, times of war and great hardship." Okay, and so you hear this. He's had this vision, or whatever. And he knows that it concerns times that are certain to happen in the future, times of war and great hardship. Right, and then it says this. It says, "When this vision came to me, I, Daniel, had been in mourning for 3 whole weeks." Right, he had been in mourning for 3 whole weeks. All that time I had eaten no rich food, no meat or wine crossed my lips, and I used no fragrant lotions until those 3 weeks had passed. So he's been in mourning, and he's been fasting and praying and doing those things for 3 weeks. Now remember, and we talked about at the beginning, like the King Nebuchadnezzar. Remember who that was? King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, who conquered Judah around right at like 597 BC. Remember that? Well, he captured and he deported like the best and the brightest young men, right, from that area, and he took them to Babylon to indoctrinate them and that kind of stuff. And Daniel and his friends were some of those people, right? So Daniel's one of those people that he had deported to try to indoctrinate them. Fast forward now, about 70 years later, and King Cyrus of Persia conquers Babylon. Right, so you got Babylon conquered Judah, right? You got this little area of Judah. You got Babylon, this bigger area conquers Judah, right? But then you've got this much bigger area now, it's Persia, that's now conquering Babylon, right? Then you've got this new king, King Cyrus. King Cyrus, if you remember, is the one who allowed the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem to worship their God and to rebuild the temple. Pretty awesome, right? That's good news for Daniel, right? That's great news for Daniel that happens, right? But he's concerned about the people of God because Israel continues to sin against God, right? So he's concerned about the people. And so for 3 weeks, he was fasting and praying over the people of Israel because he had this vision of more bad stuff that's going to be happening to them. And so he's fasting and he's praying. And notice that Daniel was deeply moved by God, right? He was deeply moved by God. And so he began this fasting and praying, right? So what did he do about it? He didn't just worry about it, right? He didn't just worry about it or gripe about it. He didn't post something negative on social media about it, right? He didn't do anything like that, right? He turned and he sought after God. Something was going to happen. He knew something bad was going to happen. There was this issue, whatever, and instead of just complaining about it, griping about it, or whatever, he turns and he seeks after God because of it, right? He sought after God, and he turned to God. For 3 weeks, Daniel fasted and prayed, and he mourned because of this vision that he had and because of what was going on. And Daniel then is, after these 3 weeks, he's on the bank of the Tigris River. And you just picture this, right? He's on the bank of the Tigris River, and he's standing there. After these 3 weeks, he's been mourning, he's been fasting, he's been praying, he's been seeking God, and he's got no answers, right? And he's there on the bank of the Tigris River, and he has another vision. And the other men with him didn't see the vision, right? The other men with him didn't see the vision. Just Daniel saw it. In Daniel 10, 5-8, it says, I looked up and saw a man dressed in linen clothing, with a belt of pure gold around his waist. His body looked like a precious gem. His face flashed like lightning, and his eyes flamed like torches. His arms and feet shone like polished bronze, and his voice roared like a vast multitude of people. Could you imagine what that would look like? And what that would have been like as Daniel standing there on the Tigris River, and all of a sudden you see this before you? Pretty amazing to think about, right? And then in verse 7, it continues, says, only I, Daniel, saw this vision. Only I, Daniel, saw this vision. The men with me saw nothing, but they were suddenly terrified and ran away to hide. So I was left there all alone to see this amazing vision. My strength left me. My face grew deathly pale, and I felt very weak, right? And you're reading this, and I'm going, man, it's crazy. Think about this vision that he has, right? But who's this man? Who's this man that he sees in this vision? Well, scholars have a couple of different options for this. One would possibly be kind of what we talked about last week a little bit, right? The idea of Christophany, which is an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament, right? It's the pre-incarnate Christ. That it could have been that. It could have been a pre-incarnate Christ that he saw. That's one possibility. Or it could have been a high-ranking angel, maybe even Gabriel. An angelic being. It could, and that's probably what I lean a little bit more towards. Is probably this angelic being, right? This Gabriel. And you notice in verse 7, when he sees this vision and he has all of this happen, in verse 7, Daniel is the only one who saw the vision. Nobody else saw it. Just him. He's with a bunch of other people. Nobody else saw it, right? There were others with him, but they didn't see this vision. I don't know, maybe it's because they weren't looking for it. Maybe it's because they weren't expecting it. Or maybe it's because they weren't ready for it. I don't know. But it says that he was the only one that saw it. Now, I think it's interesting, too. It says that suddenly, the other people were suddenly terrified and ran away to hide. Like they knew something was going on, but they didn't see the vision, right? And so he's the only one that saw it. So for whatever the reason, whatever it was, God had something special, right? Something personal just for Daniel. And it was a message just for him. It was a vision just for him. And those that were with him, they didn't see it. They knew something was going on. They ran away and hid, right? But he was the only one to receive that message. And it was a personal message to him. And in that same way, God might have something special for you, right? If you've been in that season of waiting and praying and fasting and doing those things, seeking God for something in your life, I think he could have a special message for you. Right? There could be something. Maybe you've been praying and earnestly seeking God because of something that's going on in your life, and God just hasn't quite answered yet. And you're still seeking God for whatever it is in your life that's going on, you're still seeking after him. Maybe he's preparing something special or personal that maybe other people might not understand. Maybe they won't even understand it. But it's a personal message, something for you, right? It could come in a lot of different ways. Maybe it's in the worship songs this morning, that there's one of the worship songs this morning we sang, or that we'll sing at the end or whatever. Maybe that spoke to you in some way, or maybe it will speak to you in some way, and it touched you in some way. Or maybe it's something in the message this morning, right? Maybe it's the passage that we're looking at, right? Maybe it's something in there that will speak to you this morning. Maybe it's something that you'll read on social media this week. I don't know. I mean, social media can be good for some things, I guess, once in a while. But maybe it's something there that you'll read. I don't know. Or maybe it's this week when you're in your quiet time, in your reading and your praying and things to God or whatever. Maybe it's at that time that he's got some kind of a special message for you. It's very possible that he has that for you. It's very possible. And if you're going through something like that right now, and you've been praying to God, and you've been asking God to speak, right, and to reveal himself to you, this morning, I think that can be a challenge for us, right? That sometimes we can get frustrated. And as we come together today, you may hear something from God. And here's the thing. You may hear something from God this morning, right, as we're talking, as we're in the message or from the worship or something like that. Or maybe you're reading something in your Bible even this morning or something like that. You may hear something even while you're sitting here. And maybe you're just the only one that's going to hear it. The person beside you might just be thinking about where they're going to go eat for lunch, right? Like that might be all that's on their mind, right? But you hear something from God because he's speaking to you this morning. That's very possible. When God revealed himself to Daniel, Daniel said this. He said, "So I was left there all alone to see this amazing vision," right? He was left there all alone to see this amazing vision. "My strength left me. My face grew deathly pale, and I felt very weak. Then I heard the man speak. And when I heard the sound of his voice, I fainted and lay there with my face to the ground." Right? He's like, man, I heard the voice, right? I heard this guy speak, and when I heard it, right, I heard the sound of his voice, and so I fainted and I lay there with my face to the ground. He couldn't even stand when this happened. Couldn't even stand up. And he fell flat on the ground with his face to the ground. He fell down before God. Why? Why was it that drastic? Why did he fall down before God? Why couldn't he stand up? Why was his strength gone from him? Well, it's because even the strongest of us cannot bear the weight of the glory of God. Even the strongest of us can't do that. And when we come into his presence, there's going to be this awe, right? There's going to be this this is going to come over us of this, whoa, like I can't imagine what that would be like. One of my favorite songs is by a group, whatever, Mercy Me, and they have this song, it's I Can Only Imagine, right? I love that song. I can only imagine what that day will be like. Will I dance before the king? Will I do all this stuff, whatever? It is really cool. I love that song, and I love to think about that and imagine that, but I'm pretty sure the first time it happens, I'm probably going to be on my face on the ground going, oh my gosh, I'm not worthy. Why am I here, right? Like, that's what it's going to be like, because even the strongest of us cannot stand under the weight of the glory of God. And I wonder if any of us this morning, if any of us have really experienced God in that way. Have we ever really experienced God in that way? Have we grieved so deeply over our sins, right? And grieved really deeply over the things that we've done, and cried tears of joy over his grace? Have you ever had a moment like that? Where you've been grieved so deeply by your sin, and you've cried tears of joy over the grace of God, and you sat in awe and reverence of God, just how amazing he truly is, right? With a peace and a joy that you can't even describe. I've had a few moments like that in my life, just a few. Right? I've had a few moments like that in my life. I remember one time I was at Momentum Youth Conference, and I was with a whole bunch of teens, and we're sitting there and we're worshiping. And you got to remember, Momentum Youth Conference is like this. It's just this thing that there's so much going on. It's kind of like an assault to the senses, honestly, in a lot of ways. But it's amazing. You're there with like 2,000 teenagers. This last year, I think they said there was like 2,400 teenagers there. It's huge. The worship is amazing. You've got these teenagers that are worshiping and singing. They're doing altar calls and things like that. And you've got teens that are going down front and giving their life to Jesus. They're doing all this stuff. And I remember one year I was sitting there with this group or whatever, and it had a couple of people that went down for this altar call. And at that moment, I was just in awe of God. I was also at the same moment thinking, why am I here? Like, why do I deserve to be here? I'm a youth pastor, and I'm speaking into their lives, yes, but why do I deserve to get to do that? Like, I'm a nobody, right? It's just, I don't, why do I have that ability to speak into their lives and to do that and to see this moment and to see them give their lives to Christ? And it was a moment where I'm like, man, I am so in awe of God right now, what he's doing, because he's using a wretch like me, right? He's using somebody who doesn't deserve to be here to reach some students that are now giving their life to him, and it's amazing to think about it. And I was just in awe of God at that moment. I've had a few moments like that in my life, right? And there's a song that I think sums it up well, and the song is "The Goodness of God." The goodness of God. And I love this song, and I love the words of this song. And there's one section that says this. It says, all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love that, right? With every breath that I am able, because you've been so faithful, because you are so, so good, with every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Isn't that amazing? Like, you think about your life and you think about all the stuff that God's done for you, and I think sometimes we take all that for granted at times. We don't really think about it enough. We don't think about it as much as we probably should about what God has actually done for us, what he saved us from. And when you really start to think about it, right, you start to think about what he's actually done, how faithful he's been, and how good he truly is, how can you not say that every breath that I am able, I will sing the goodness of God, right? How do you not want to do that and just say, you know what, I want to proclaim the goodness of God to everybody that can hear because of how amazing he truly is and what he's done for me and what he can do for them. Now, back to Daniel, right? While Daniel was on his face before God, Daniel said this in verses 10 and 11. He said, just then a hand touched me and lifted me. Just then a hand touched me and lifted me, still trembling to my hands and knees. And the man said to me, Daniel, you are very precious to God. God is so holy. God is so good, right? He is so kind. Daniel is on his face before God at this moment, right? He's on his face before God. He's trembling. He's weak. He can't even move. He's laying there, and he's on his face before God. He's crying out to God. He's afraid, right? He's burdened. He's overwhelmed. And Daniel said that just then, this hand, right? This hand from heaven touched me, right? It reached down and touched me, and it lifted me, right? It lifted him up in that moment and said, you are very precious to God. I love this image. I love this image, right? A God who lifts us up. That's an amazing image to think about, right? A God that lifts us up. When King David was running for his life, he said this in Psalm 3:3. It says, but you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. You're the lifter of my head. God lifts those that he loves, right? He lifts those that he loves, and he loves you, and he loves me. And he will lift us even in our times of need. Even in our darkest moments in life, he will reach down and touch you, and he will lift you, right? He will give you that courage and that strength and things to move forward. When you're discouraged and you're down, remember that he is the lifter of your head. He is the one. He's the one that gives you the strength to lift your head in that moment and to move forward in those moments. This heavenly hand, it lifted Daniel, and the voice said, you are precious to God, right? It said that you are precious to God. For some of us, maybe we need to hear that from heaven today. Maybe we've been seeking after God and we've been praying to him and we haven't quite got the answers we've been looking for, and we're just kind of in this waiting period. And maybe we need to hear this today, that you are precious to God, that he loves you, right? He loves you, he sees you, and he knows your pain. And he hears your heart's cry. He hears your heart's cry. In verse 12, it says this. Then he said, don't be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you began to pray for understanding and to humble yourself before God, your request has been heard in heaven. I have come in answer to your prayer. There those of you who have been praying for something for a really long time, maybe. Maybe you've been praying for something for a really long time, and you've been seeking after God, you've been praying for it, you've been believing that he can, you've believing that he will, and it just hasn't happened yet, right? You've been praying for so long that maybe you're starting to get a little discouraged, right? Starting to get a little bit discouraged because it just hasn't happened. Or you're thinking, why even bother at this point, right? God, maybe you're thinking, maybe you're at that point where you're just like, I don't even know, maybe God's not even going to do it. Maybe he just won't. Or you're thinking nothing's going to change, right? Maybe God just doesn't even care about this, right? You've gotten to that point where you're just discouraged and you're troubled by it, and you're like, maybe he just doesn't even care, right? I've been praying for this, I've been wanting this, but maybe God just doesn't even care. Here's the thing, from the first day that you began to pray, God heard your prayer in heaven, right? That's what Scripture says. From the very first time that you began to pray, he heard your prayer in heaven, right? He heard your heart's cry, right? The very first time you prayed, he heard your heart's cry. So Daniel prayed for 3 weeks, right? He prayed for 3 weeks and he saw nothing. He was praying and fasting and devoting himself to God. Like he was going above and beyond for this. He's really mourning over the people of Israel, and he's praying about it. And he's been doing it for 3 weeks, and he saw nothing. Right? For 3 weeks, he's not getting the answers. He's not seeing anything, but he still continues to do that. And then all of a sudden, this angelic being appears in front of him, right? And it says this. It says, "But for 21 days, the spirit prince of the kingdom of Persia blocked my way. Then Michael, one of the archangels, came to help me, and I left him there with the spirit prince of the kingdom of Persia." Like, there's a lot going on in this verse, right? There's a lot there to unpack, right? But it gives us one of the best pictures of Old Testament spiritual warfare, right? It gives us one of the best pictures of spiritual warfare in the Old Testament when you read that, right? For 21 days, the spirit of the prince of the kingdom of Persia blocked my way, right? And then Michael, one of the archangels, came to help me, and I left him there with the spirit of the kingdom, prince of the kingdom of Persia. Like, it's crazy to think about, right? It's hard to even wrap your minds around that sometimes when we think about that, right? The spiritual warfare that's going on around us all of the time. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood." Right? We need to remember this. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. That is who the fight is against. And it's hard to think about that sometimes, right? And when you read this passage, right, it's this angelic being says that for 21 days the prince of the kingdom of Persia blocked their way. Most scholars would say that this spirit prince is a demonic force or a fallen angel, right? And that they're blocking his way to get to Daniel. It says that the archangel Michael, then, the protector of God's people, intervenes, right? And he comes in and he intervenes in the middle of this. And in the middle of that, so that the angelic being could be released to go to Daniel. It's pretty amazing to think about. Like, all of this is going on. Daniel's clueless, right? He has no idea. He doesn't know this is going on. He's been praying, he's been fasting, he's been doing all this stuff. He has no clue that that's been going on in the background. And this angelic being comes and says this to him. This is so powerful, right? This is so powerful when you truly think about it. Daniel's been doing all this stuff for 3 weeks, right? And he was praying and doing all this, and he saw nothing during that time. He had no answers. Didn't know what was going on. Could have been starting to get to that point where maybe he was getting a little discouraged. I don't know. And he was starting to be like, maybe God's just not hearing me. Maybe he's just not going to do anything. Maybe he doesn't care. Maybe, I don't know. There's all kinds of things that we start thinking in times of waiting like that, don't we? There's all kinds of things that start to run through our brains and run through our minds in those times. But here's the thing. It's so powerful because Daniel he didn't see anything. But here's the thing. It didn't mean that God wasn't working. It didn't mean that God wasn't working, even though he wasn't seeing anything. This should be an encouragement for someone today, right? Who maybe has been praying and waiting for something. This should be a real encouragement for them. right? Because here's the thing with God, a waiting season is never a wasted season, right? A waiting season is never a wasted season because while you're waiting, God is still working, right? While you're waiting, God is still working. He's still working even while you're waiting. He's he's not just like sitting up there twiddling his thumbs going, hey, I'm waiting for you. I hear you, but you're not doing the right thing, so I'm not doing nothing, right? No, while you're waiting, while you're praying and you're fasting and you're focusing on him and you're doing those things, while you're waiting for something, he is still working. He's always working. It's pretty amazing to think about that. While you're waiting, God's angels are fighting on your behalf in the heavenly realms. Can you picture that? Can you picture what that even looks like? It's crazy to even think about, but it's true. While you're waiting, God's angels are fighting in the heavenly realms. Like, that's amazing. And it should encourage us this morning when we hear that, right? Daniel prayed and God heard him. And Daniel didn't see anything. He didn't see what was going on, but God unleashed his angelic beings to do battle against the forces of darkness because of Daniel and his prayers. That's pretty cool. Pretty powerful when you really think about it. It's pretty amazing. Daniel told us in this passage that he was overwhelmed, right? He falls down flat on his face, right? He says he has no strength. And he is in the presence of this holy being, right? And verses 18 through 19 says, then the one who looked like a man touched me again, right? The one who looked like a man touched me again, and I felt my strength returning. Don't be afraid, he said, for you are very precious to God. Peace, be encouraged, be strong. You read that, and I can't help but read that and go, man, there's a lot there, right? It's this angelic being that reaches down again, and it touched him again. And all of a sudden, when he was touched, all of a sudden he felt his strength returning, right? God is the lifter. He'll lift us up, right? He's the one that will lift our head. He'll give us the strength. He'll give us the courage. He'll give us what we need to move forward, right? And he said, I felt my strength returning. And it said, the angelic being said, do not be afraid, right? Don't be afraid. Like, I get it. You're on your face because you just saw something that you don't even understand, and it terrified you, right? And you passed out. You're on your face before God. You're going, He is so holy. I am so not, and I'm in a terrible place right now because I feel so whatever about this whole situation. And you're on the floor terrified, right? He's saying, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, for you are so precious, very precious to God. And then he says, peace. Be encouraged. He tells Daniel, listen, have peace right now. Be at peace. And I don't know about you, but I think there's a lot of times in life when God's probably saying this to us, right? Peace, be encouraged, be strong. And the idea of peace is like, I don't know how I can have peace in a situation like this. I don't know how you have peace when you're standing before this angelic being that has flames for eyes and all of this stuff, right? And you're just like, whoa, what is this, right? How do you have peace in that moment? Right? It's only by God. It's by his grace. It's by him giving us that peace. He allows us to have peace in those types of times, and we can rely on that. And in our hard times in life and the things that we're going through, we can have that peace that surpasses all understanding, right? We don't even understand it. We don't know where we can't even really understand fully where it comes from. We just know it comes from God, that he gives it to us in our greatest times of need. And we should be encouraged, right? Be encouraged. He's like, be encouraged. Like, I love what he says there. You are very precious to God. We should be encouraged by that. We should be so encouraged by that, and then be strong, right? Like, I know you feel like your strength has left you right now, but stand up, be strong, right? Yeah, I know you're going through something right now. I know you've been fasting, you've been praying, you've been doing all this, you've been waiting. I'm here to help you out. I'm here to help you know that it wasn't for nothing, right? You didn't do that for nothing. There's been stuff going on in the background that you didn't even know about. And I'm here to help you with that. I need you to be strong now. Right? And it's amazing to think about it. And as we think about Daniel, right, and the things that we've talked about over the last few weeks, right? Daniel he's been through a lot. Daniel, and then you've got Shadrach and Benny, right? You got those guys, and they've been through a lot, right? There's a lot of things that have gone on as we've talked in the last few weeks. And one of the things we started talking about the very first week was, how do you live with conviction in a culture of compromise? Right? How do you live with conviction in a culture of compromise? And I think we need to remember, right, that Daniel, right, he resolved to be faithful no matter what the consequences were. Right? Remember with the food and all that kind of stuff, it says that Daniel had resolved. It was a pre-decision. It was a decision that he had made before he got into the situation. Before he was tempted by the food and all that food was laid out with him, he had already determined in his heart that he was going to be faithful to God no matter what. He made that decision so that when he was tempted, when he was in that situation, he didn't just give in, or he didn't have to be like, oh no, now what do I do? No, he already knew. No, I'm going to be faithful to God. I'm not eating this food, right? And he had determined, he had made up his mind to be faithful to God no matter what. And I think we need to do that, right? We need to think in our own hearts, we need to think in our own minds, like, how do we predetermine that we're going to be faithful to God no matter what comes about, no matter what happens, no matter what I've been praying for and waiting for and I haven't gotten the results yet, whatever it is, how do we be faithful to God? How do we continue to put him first in our lives? How do we be faithful to him and say that no matter what happens, I'm still going to be faithful to him? Remember what we said about that you may live in Babylon, but you don't have to let Babylon inside of you, right? Daniel, how do you stand up in a culture of compromise? You might live in Babylon, and a lot of times I think in these days and age, it feels like we live in Babylon, right? That we live in a foreign world that doesn't want anything to do with us and what we believe. And how do we stay strong in that? Well, just because we live in Babylon doesn't mean that we have to allow Babylon into us. Doesn't mean we have to allow those things to compromise us and compromise our beliefs and compromise our values, right? I think that's something that today we struggle with as a culture, right? I think we live in like I said, a culture of compromise, right? People compromise all the time. And they're like, it's just really hard. It's really difficult. I don't know, maybe I should just give in this one time, right? But here's the thing, that's letting Babylon inside. That's letting that get inside you and change how you feel or how your views or whatever. You're compromising, and that's not okay. We don't have to let Babylon into us. Daniel, remember with that food and with all of the different stuff, whatever, Daniel, he distinguished himself. We talked about how Daniel distinguished himself from all of the other leaders and all of those. He distinguished himself. He stood out no matter what we do, right? No matter what we do it all for the glory of God. And that's what Daniel did, right? Even in that situation with the king and things, he was different. He didn't just give in, and he didn't just say, well, you know what, this one time I guess it'll be okay. Even in the lion's den, right? It would have been very easy for him to just change his pattern, right, and not pray 3 times a day in front of the big window, that everybody could see him, right? It would be much easier for him to go into some private little room somewhere and pray and be like, hey, I'm still praying. I'm still doing what God's asked me to do. I'm just not doing it in front of the big window, right? You know what I mean? It would have been very easy for him to change those things, or to go, you know what, it's okay. God tells me I'm supposed to pray to him and stuff, but I can just do it with my eyes wide open. I can do it while I'm sitting there. Nobody even has to know I'm praying. I can still pray to God, right? I don't have to, I can just change the way I do it. It's easy to compromise, but he didn't do that. He said, no, I'm going to stand firm. I'm not going to compromise on these things. He said, everything that I do, I'm going to do it for the glory of God, and he distinguishes himself in that way. And people see that. Those other rulers and stuff saw that in Daniel. And they weren't like, oh man, he's such an amazing dude. Like, we really admire that. Wow, hope he does great. No, they actually attacked him for it, right? They actually conspired with the king to try to get him thrown in the lion's den, and it worked. He got thrown in the lion's den, but he remained faithful. He remained totally faithful in that time. And here's the thing, God is faithful, and because he is faithful, we need to be faithful, and we need to pray. We need to continue praying to God. When times get tough, that shouldn't be a time when all of a sudden it's like, oh, right, like, well, what else can we do? I guess now we can pray. No, it should be the first thing we think about, right? The first thing we think about, we should pray. What did Daniel do when he had his vision and he saw all the things that was going to happen to the people and stuff? He began to fast and to pray and devote himself to God, right? He he was mourning for the people. He was so moved by God that he was praying for 3 weeks. He had devoted himself to prayer for 3 weeks to do that because he was so moved by God. And because God is so faithful, and that we need to be faithful, right? And we can say to God, right? We should be saying, God, I believe you can. God, I believe you can. And God, I believe that you will. I believe you will. But then you remember what the other thing is we should be saying? But even if you don't. But even if you don't, I still believe. Remember we said last week about Shadrach and Benny, right? And the fiery furnace? That was them. They're like, listen, King, we know that our God can save us from this fire. We know that he can. And actually, we believe he will. We believe he's going to deliver us from your hand. Now, when they said that, I do believe there's 2 separate meanings that they meant by that, right? They meant he's going to deliver us from your hands. Either he's going to save us from the fire and we're not going to burn up, like something's going to happen and we're not even going to go into the flames, or we're going to go into the flames, we're going to die, and we're going to be with Jesus, and either way, we're delivered from your hands, right? Like, I think that's really what they were thinking. Because then they said, we believe that he can, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to serve you. We're still going to serve our God. And they stood firm in that, right? They stood firm in that. And they said that even if you don't, I still believe. I think that's so hard for us, right? So hard for us so many times in life when we're going through something difficult, when we've been praying and we've been waiting and we've been thinking about, how's this gonna turn out? What's gonna happen? I'm praying, I'm fasting, I'm doing all these things, and I'm devoting myself to God in this, and I'm really earnestly seeking after him, and I'm just not getting any answers. I think it'd be so hard for us then to stay firm in that and go, you know what? He hasn't done it yet, and I still believe he will, but even if he doesn't, even if I don't get the answer that I need or that I think I should get, I'm still going to believe. I'm still going to have faith in him. And whatever it is, it's not going to rock my world so much that I would lose faith in God. I still believe, right? That even if he doesn't, there's still a plan, right? There's still a plan. And then we said about this, what do we say about the fire? When we find ourselves in the fire, because here's the thing, just like Shadrach and Benny, right? They believed that God could save them from the fire, but God doesn't always save you from the fire, right? He doesn't always pull you out just before the fire starts to rage, does he? Sometimes you have to go through the fire. And you think about, Shadrach and Benny, you think about them in that fire, and we talked about that last week, right? This idea of them being in this fire, and who was in the fire with them? Jesus was there. He met them in the fire. And Jesus will meet you in the fire. He will never leave you nor forsake you. He's always with you. He will be with you in that fire. And I love that image that we talked about last week, right? That idea of the 3 men walking around in the fire, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, there's a 4th guy. And they're literally walking around in the fire. Like, that's crazy to think about. But the king's like, didn't we just throw 3 guys in there? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, there's 4 guys walking around in the fire. And then when they bring them out, they didn't even smell like smoke. They didn't even smell like smoke. They've been in a furnace that killed the guards that were throwing them in because they got too close to the furnace. Now they've been in the furnace, brought back out, and they don't even smell like smoke. It's pretty amazing. That's the God that we serve. That's how faithful he truly is. He can literally take us through the fire, be with us the entire way, and when we come out on the other side, we don't even smell like smoke. It's pretty amazing to think about that. If you're here today and you're discouraged, if you've been praying about something and you've just been waiting and you just haven't gotten the answers yet and you're just not sure what's going to happen, you're just praying and waiting, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, right? Don't be afraid. You serve an amazing God. You are precious to God, right? You are precious to God. God is a holy God. God is a good God, and God is a kind God, and he hears your prayers. He hears your prayers. From the very first time you prayed, he heard your heart's cry. We should be encouraged by that. We should be so encouraged by that from that first time that you prayed, he heard your prayer was heard in heaven. It's amazing to think about. And he's released his angels to do war on your behalf. There's a spiritual warfare going on that we can't even see. And Daniel couldn't see it. But that doesn't mean that it's not happening. Doesn't mean that it's not going on. There's this spiritual warfare that's going on. And if God is for you, who can be against you, right? If God is for you, who can be against you? Whatever you're going through, whatever in life is happening, if God is for you, who can be against you? And that should give us some great encouragement this morning, right? I love what it says here, right? Peace, be encouraged, be strong. This morning, I think we need to hear that, right? Have peace. Whatever it is you're going through, have peace. God, and the only place you're going to find that peace, the only place you can find that peace is through Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior. Right? No matter what it is that you're going through, that's where you find peace. When you turn to him, you can have that peace that surpasses all understanding, that nobody else even understands it, right? It's a peace that's for you. It's something that God gives you and he grants you, and other people see it and they question, what is that about? How does that even happen? And it becomes a testimony to him because you can have that type of peace and be encouraged, right? Again, like I said, if you're discouraged this morning, we should be encouraged. We should be encouraged about this passage and what this passage has to say to us this morning, right? That Daniel was praying. He didn't see what was going on, but God was still working, even when he didn't know what was going on. And be strong. Right? Be strong. We can be strong even in our weakest moments. Even in our weakest moments, we can be strong if we turn to God. We allow him to give us that strength. We allow him to reach down and touch us and fill us with strength, right? Just like that angelic being did to Daniel, right? When he touched him and his strength returned. And then he says, peace, be encouraged, be strong. Stand up. You can now stand on your own 2 feet because I've given you strength, because God gives you the strength that you need, the encouragement that you need, to move forward and to do what it is that he's called you to do. So don't stop praying. Don't stop praying. Don't stop wondering what's going to happen. And even if the answer is no, or it's just an answer that you don't think should be, or whatever it is, don't give up and don't turn on God and be like, God, I can't believe you just did that. No, he's got a plan, right? He's got a plan. And we should be so encouraged by that. Remember what we said earlier in this series, right? Daniel 2:28. There is a God in heaven, right? That is so profound right there. That little statement right there should give us so much hope, should give us so much encouragement. Just to think about the fact that there is a God in heaven, that he cares. We know that he cares about us. We know that he says that he sends his angels to war on our behalf, right? That he hears our heart's cry. We know all of that. There is a God in heaven. He's got a plan. He knows what that plan is. We may not understand the plan, but that doesn't mean that God doesn't still have a plan. He's not still working his plan just because we don't understand it. There is a plan. God's got a plan for me. He's got a plan for you. He's got a plan for all of us. And we should be so encouraged by that there is a God in heaven. There is a God in heaven. As we think about Daniel, I think, man, I wish I could say, man, I'm like Daniel. I don't compromise ever. I do what's right. I've predetermined, but there are times that I fail. There's times that I fall. There's times that I go, man, I wish I had stood my ground on this issue. Man, I wish I had done this. Man, I wish I had done that. That's the amazing thing about God and his grace. He forgives you. If you turn to him and you ask him to, he will forgive you for all of those things. And he gives you the courage and the strength to continue on and then to stand firm the next time. We can learn from those mistakes, those things in the past. And we can then be encouraged and just know that there is a God in heaven. He's got a plan, and I don't have to understand the plan to trust the plan. Amen? Let's pray. Father, just thank you again for this opportunity this morning for us to be here, to be able to dig into your word a little bit more, to think about Daniel and his life and the things that we can pull from that, and just the wonderful example that you've given us in Daniel. Father, I pray that you would help each and every one of us here, that maybe even those that are discouraged this morning come away feeling encouraged, or have a word from you, Father, this morning. Maybe it's from the worship. Maybe it's not from anything I even said. Maybe it's just from reading this passage. Maybe it's just that you've been speaking to them, Father, and I pray that you would help them to be encouraged this morning and know that you have a plan. You know exactly what's going on. You're not surprised by these circumstances, and that you have a plan and a purpose for all of it. Father, I pray that you would just be with this church as they continue to think about where we go next and how we do things and all of those things. Father, I pray that you would just be with them and encourage them and strengthen them and keep them focused on you. Father, I pray that you would help them to predetermine that no matter what happens, they're not going to lose faith. They're not going to walk away. They're going to know that you are there, you have a plan, and that you have been preparing us for this moment. Father, I pray that you would help us to share with all of those around us, right? Whether it's at work or at school or wherever we find ourselves, I pray that you would help us to share that type of hope with the people around us so that they can understand where it is we get our strength from, where they can understand where we get our peace from, and that they could have that for themselves. Father, I pray that you help us to focus on Jesus Christ, who he truly is, and introducing people to Jesus in our daily lives. And these things I ask in your name. Amen.